This is a great story. I love this story. Not quite as much as Danny loves this story, but I'm not sure anybody can love it that much. This parable is rich and layered. It connects with us differently each time we read it. It communicates clear encouragement, and it points out places for improvement. It is a simple story, which I will do my best to complicate, because that's what I do. It is a story about God's love and grace, which can often be undignified. It is a story about celebrating. It is a story about what breaks the heart of God. It is a story about us and where we are as a congregation. Would you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The three main characters of this story are the father and his two sons. The father represents God. The younger son represents the tax collectors and sinners Jesus was known to pal around with. And the elder son represents the Pharisees and other religious persons Jesus always seemed to be teaching, which really means he always seemed to be arguing with them. Each of the sons is loved by the Father, meaning the tax collectors and sinners are loved by God just as much as the Pharisees and the religious persons. We connect with this story through each of the sons. At different points in our lives, we may connect with different sons. Each son receives encouragement from this story. Each son receives correction from this story. Thus, each of us is encouraged, and each of us is corrected. This is a story about God's love. But another layer of this story is about what breaks the heart of God. And that is our rejection. Our rejection of living lives based in love, our rejection of reconciling relationships, all the decisions we make which lead us away from God, they all break God's heart. The younger son's rejection is very obvious. The first words out of his mouth in this parable are basically, "I wish you were dead, Dad. Give me the property that I will get when you die." He then sells that property and runs away. Remember, the younger son represented those tax collectors and sinners Jesus hung out with. Today, we could say that the younger son represents all those who reject a relationship with God for any number of reasons. They may not agree with the logic of a supernatural being who created and guides the universe. They may have experiences with the church or Christians who cause them to reject God. Whatever the reasons, there are many in our world who reject God by taking the gift of life and running in the opposite direction from God. And like the younger son in our story, many find themselves lost in desperate situations. But those desperate situations are not a punishment. I don't think that's the way God works. I don't think God punishes people who reject him. I think we all have the freedom to choose how we live our lives. And those decisions have consequences. If we run from God, if we try to make it on our own, then we will probably find ourselves in a metaphorical pigsty. Because we were created to exist in community with God and with others. We were created to live our lives influenced by love. It's very easy to live our lives influenced by self-interest if we reject a relationship with God. Trust me, I've been there. I've done that. And so have many of you. But what happens when the younger son comes to his senses and returns to the father? What happens when one who has rejected God by running in the opposite direction chooses to turn around and seek God out? Well, God's grace becomes undignified in its exuberance. See, the story doesn't tell us how the father reacted to his younger son's rejection. It doesn't tell us that the father would glance down the road hundreds of times a day. It doesn't tell us that every messenger would cause his heart to skip a beat because he was anticipating news about his younger son. It doesn't tell us that he would hope and pray every morning and every night for his younger son's return. But I think that is exactly what he was doing. And I think that is exactly what God is doing. I think God is looking for the return of those who have run in the opposite direction. I think God is calling out for them. I don't think God is forcing anybody to return home. But I do think God is hoping and praying every morning and every night for their return. The only thing the story does tell us is that the father sees the younger son at a great distance, which could have only happened if he was looking and waiting. And that is when the story becomes undignified. The father sprints down the road to his younger son. Now, it's really important for us to understand that running was not something a civilized man would do in the ancient world. Their robes made it very difficult to run, and if they were to fall as a result of their running, well, anyone who has ever worn a dress can tell you how embarrassing that could be. Running was not dignified. It was not proper. Also, the younger son had rejected the father. The dignified response to his return would be to have a slave meet him at the property line and escort him to the father. But the love of the father causes him to react in a very undignified way. He runs out to meet his son. He wraps his arms around him, and yes, it says quite clearly, he kisses his long-lost son. And then he does another undignified thing. He doesn't allow his son to beg for his acceptance. He gives his acceptance freely, just as he gave it on the day his son was born. He calls for the best robe and a ring and shoes, all of which are signs that he has been accepted back into the family. He calls for the fatted calf to be prepared. The fatted calf, which was reserved for the most special occasions, not the return of a son who basically told his father to hurry up and die. And then they began to celebrate. And where was the older son while all of this was happening? Well, he was in the fields, working, of course. The story leaves a lot out about the older brother as well. It doesn't tell us that the older brother had to work extra hard because the younger brother left. It doesn't tell us that the older brother watched his father pace and pray for the return of his brother. It doesn't tell us that he worked dutifully every day because he wanted to make his father proud. But I think he did. I think he knew that his father was good and loving. I think he knew that his father loved him just as much as his father loved his younger brother. At least I think he knew that until the day his younger brother returned. Until the day he walked out of the fields into a celebration in which the younger son had been wholeheartedly accepted back into the family without any punishment, without any testing, without any retribution, without any repayment. And worse yet, the fatted calf had been prepared. I think this is the moment in which the seedling of jealousy, which was planted in his heart while watching his father pace and pray, sprouted into a great tangled vine of jealousy. How dare his father react in such an undignified manner? How dare his father celebrate the return of a son who had wished him dead with such exuberance and extravagance? He had done everything right. He had obeyed the rules, worked diligently, denied himself, and this is how he gets repaid? His younger brother gets the celebration, and he is forgotten. Now, this is a good time to remember that the older brother represents the Pharisees and religious persons that Jesus was telling this story to. They had studied the scriptures. They had attended weekly worship. They had obeyed the rules. They had done everything the way they were supposed to. At least they thought they had. Then Jesus comes along and keeps arguing with them about taking care of the least of these. Jesus comes along and keeps eating with sinners instead of them. Jesus comes along and keeps seeking out the poor, the injured, the foreigner, and the tax collector instead of taking care of them. Jesus was living out this same undignified grace that the father in the story was living out. So they rejected him. Just like the older son rejects the father. They will not be part of this undignified celebration. So they cross their arms and they wait outside. This is the moment in the story that we as a congregation are at. This is the moment in this story where we enter the picture, where we are found. We have seen the love of God, just as the older son had seen the love of the father. We have worked and obeyed. We have attended and sacrificed. We have cooked meals, visited hospital beds, planned events, attended worships, attended studies, been elders, been deacons, been on boards, listened to sermons, given money, given more money. We have done everything we were supposed to do, just like the older son. And through those experiences, we have gained knowledge of who God is and how God can change people's lives. We have learned things about Scripture. We have prayed together. We have cried together. We have healed each other. We have formed a community which is healthy. That is no small feat. We have worked hard, and still we are called to do even more. We are called to welcome those that have rejected God. We are called to welcome them with radical acceptance, even before they beg for that acceptance. We are called to search for those who have left home. And we are called to reach out to them with love and grace. We are called to join this undignified running down the street towards the ones who have turned from God. With no celebration of our work, with no fatted calf for our efforts, not even a young goat for us and our friends, with no extravagant party for our deeds, with no appreciation. But that's not true, is it? You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. That is God's response. Your Creator appreciates your presence in this community. Your Creator has accepted you and loves you and has given you freedom to choose the path in life which you saw fit. And you have decided not to reject God and run in the opposite direction. And if you did, you returned. Your Creator appreciates you. I appreciate you. The ministers on staff appreciate you. The leaders of this congregation appreciate you. And God is throwing a celebration in which all of God's children are called to attend. You have wisdom and experience to offer those who are returning. You have hospitality and acceptance to give freely. But we have to join the celebration. So let's go inside. Let's give our younger brother a hug. And let's celebrate. Because that's what you do when someone who is lost is found. That's what God did when you were lost and found. This is a story about how rejection is the thing that breaks the heart of God. But this story also reveals that God's grace and love are greater than we could ever imagine. So please, uncross your arms with me, and let's all join in the undignified grace and love of God.